The metallic clang of chains echoed through the obsidian corridors of Queen Thaline's palace as Garland was dragged deeper into the heart of Zithera's royal stronghold. The human officer stumbled, his uniform torn and bloodied from the battle that had led to his capture. 3 days ago, he had led a reconnaissance mission into Zithran territory, a mission that had gone catastrophically wrong when they encountered an enemy patrol. The Zithran guards flanking him were nearly twice his height, their crystalline armor reflecting the bioluminescent panels that lit the hallway. Their faces were hidden behind ornate helmets, but Garland could feel their contempt radiating toward him like heat from a forge. To them, he was nothing more than a captured vermin, a representative of the inferior race that dared to challenge the might of the Zithran Empire. As they approached the massive doors of the Judgment Chamber, Garland steeled himself for what was to come. He had heard the stories of Queen Thaline, how she personally oversaw the execution of human prisoners, how she took pleasure in displaying their deaths as warnings to any who would dare oppose her rule. The ornate doors carved with intricate patterns depicting Zithran victories over various alien species seemed to leer at him as they slowly parted. The chamber beyond was vast and imposing, its ceiling lost in shadows despite the numerous glowing fixtures suspended from above. At the far end sat Queen Thaline on her crystal throne, a magnificent seat, carved from a single piece of azure stone that seemed to pulse with inner light. The queen herself was a vision of alien beauty and terrifying power. Her skin had a faint iridescent quality that shifted between silver and pale blue while her eyes burned like twin stars. Her hair, a cascade of silver threads that seemed to move with a life of their own, was adorned with a crown of black metal and precious stones. Flanking her throne stood 2 figures that made Garland's blood run cold. To her left was Lord Vexer, the Queen's chief advisor, whose hawkish features and calculating gaze marked him as a dangerous political player. To her right was Dr. Lyrian, the court's chief scientist, whose numerous cybernetic implants and cold analytical stare suggested someone who viewed all living beings as potential test subjects. But it was the creature lying at the foot of the throne that truly commanded Garland's attention. Kova. The Queen's guardian beast was a magnificent and terrifying sight. The size of a small vehicle, the creature resembled a fusion of predatory grace and armored might. Its body was covered in scales that shifted between deep purple and midnight black, while its eyes glowed with an inner fire. 6 powerful limbs, ending in razor-sharp claws, supported its bulk, and its serpentine tail tipped with what appeared to be a natural blade coiled restlessly behind it. As Garland was forced to his knees before the throne, Queen Thaline rose gracefully, her movements fluid despite the ornate armor she wore. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of absolute power, each word precisely enunciated in the common tongue that served as a diplomatic language between species. So, she began, her tone dripping with disdain, this is the human who led the attack on our border outpost. Tell me, Captain Garland, what possessed you to think your pathetic species could challenge the might of Zithera? Garland lifted his head to meet her gaze, ignoring the guard who pressed a weapon against his neck in warning. I was following orders, Your Majesty. Our forces were told your people had been enslaving human colonists. A laugh like breaking crystal filled the chamber. How typical of humans to create justifications for their aggression. We have no interest in your kind except as a source of amusement. She descended the steps of her dais, each footfall ringing like a bell. You will die here today, human, but first you will watch as we demonstrate what happens to those who oppose us. Lord Vexer stepped forward, a device in his hand that hummed with energy. The neural disruptor is ready, Your Majesty. 1 pulse will render him unconscious, and then we can proceed with the public execution. But as Vexer raised the device, something unexpected happened. Kova, who had remained motionless throughout the proceedings, suddenly raised its great head. Its eyes fixed on Garland, and a low rumble emerged from its throat, not threatening, but almost questioning. The chamber fell silent. Even the queen turned to look at her guardian beast with surprise. In all her years, she had never seen Kova show interest in a prisoner. Strange, Dr. Lyrian murmured, his cybernetic eye whirring as it focused on the scene. The creature's bio-readings are most unusual. Garland felt a strange compulsion wash over him. Without fully understanding why, he spoke to the beast. Easy, friend, no need for alarm. The effect was instantaneous and shocking. Kova rose to its feet in one fluid motion, its massive form moving between Garland and the guards. The beast's eyes blazed as it released a roar that made the very walls of the chamber vibrate. The guards immediately raised their weapons but hesitated. Kova was the queen's prized guardian, not to be harmed lightly. Impossible, breathed Lord Vexer, lowering his device. Kova responds only to the queen's voice. It has never shown such behavior toward a prisoner. Queen Theline's expression had shifted from amusement to something far more dangerous, intense curiosity mixed with anger. Guards, stand down, she commanded, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. I want to see what happens next. She moved closer to Garland, her eyes never leaving Kova's protective stance. Speak to it again, human. Let us see if this was merely coincidence. Garland, still not understanding what was happening, addressed the creature again. Kova, stand easy. No one here means you harm. The great beast's posture relaxed slightly, though it remained alert. Its head turned toward Garland, and for a moment, human and creature seemed to share some form of silent communication. The queen's eyes narrowed dangerously. Fascinating and impossible. Kova was bonded to me through ancient rituals when it was but a hatchling. No other voice should have such effect. She gestured to Dr. Lyrian. Run a full-spectrum analysis on this human. I want to know everything about him. As the doctor approached with scanning devices, Lord Vexer stepped closer to the queen. Your Majesty, he said in a low voice. Perhaps we should proceed with the execution. This anomaly could be dangerous. But the queen held up a hand for silence. No, I will not destroy something so unprecedented without understanding it first. She fixed Garland with a stare that seemed to pierce through it to his soul. You interest me, human, and very few things interest me anymore. Dr. Lyrian's devices hummed as they scanned Garland from head to toe. The doctor's expression grew increasingly puzzled as he reviewed the readings. Your Majesty, he said finally, there are some irregularities in this human's genetic structure. I would need more time to analyze them properly. Then you shall have it, the queen declared. Guards, take our guest to the private cells in the West Wing. He is to be kept comfortable, well-fed, and unharmed. I want him available for study. As the guards moved to escort him away, Garland looked back at Kova. The creature's eyes followed him until he disappeared from view, leaving the court in a state of bewildered tension. In the days that followed, Garland found himself in luxurious accommodations that seemed more like a suite than a prison cell. The chambers were spacious, furnished with comfortable bedding, and equipped with a window that offered a stunning view of the Zitharan capital city. The food brought to him was far better than standard military rations, and he was even allowed access to a small library containing books translated into various languages. But despite the comfortable surroundings, Garland remained acutely aware that he was a prisoner. Guards were always present outside his door, and he knew that his fate depended entirely on the whims of Queen Theline. On the third day of his captivity, the queen herself arrived at his chambers, accompanied by Kova and a small retinue of guards. She had traded her formal court attire for something more practical, a form-fitting outfit that still managed to convey her royal status while allowing for easier movement. Walk with me, she commanded, not waiting for his response, before turning and heading toward the door. Garland followed, noting how Kova seemed to position itself between him and the guards as if the creature had appointed itself as his protector. They made their way through corridors he hadn't seen before, past fantastic artworks and architectural wonders that spoke of a civilization far older and more sophisticated than humanity's. They emerged onto a massive balcony that overlooked the palace gardens. Below, fountains of liquid crystal created dancing patterns of light, while strange trees with silver leaves swayed in a breeze that carried the scent of alien flowers. "Tell me of Earth," the queen said suddenly. Her back still turned to him as she gazed out over the gardens. The request surprised him. "What would you like to know, Your Majesty?" "Everything. Your history, your culture, your conflicts. I want to understand what drives your species to such reckless actions as invading our territory." And so Garland began to speak. He told her of Earth's blue oceans and green continents, of humanity's long struggle from primitive caves to the stars. He spoke of art and music, of love and loss, of the wars that had driven them to seek new homes among distant suns. The queen listened in silence, occasionally asking pointed questions that revealed a keen intelligence and a deep understanding of political dynamics. As the hours passed, Garland began to realize that he was engaged in more than just an interrogation. This was a genuine exchange of ideas. When the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold that were perfectly suited to the Zitharan aesthetic, the queen finally turned to face him. "You speak of your people with both pride and sorrow," she observed. "That is unexpected. Every species has its triumphs and tragedies, Your Majesty. Even yours, I would imagine." Something flickered in her eyes, surprise perhaps, or recognition. Very few dare to suggest that the Zitharans might have anything to regret. "I meant no disrespect. Only that power and pain often go hand in hand regardless of species." She studied him for a long moment, then looked at Kova, who had remained close to Garland throughout their conversation. The creature's protective behavior had become even more pronounced, and the queen couldn't help but notice how naturally Garland interacted with it. "Tomorrow," she said finally, "you will join me for the morning meal. We will continue this conversation." As the days turned into weeks, these meetings became routine. The queen would arrive at his chambers, and they would walk through various parts of the palace while discussing everything from philosophy to military strategy. Kova was always present, and its bond with Garland seemed to strengthen with each passing day. During one of their walks through the palace's war room, where holographic displays showed the current state of the conflict between humans and Zitharans, the queen made an observation that chilled Garland to the bone. "Your people are losing this war," she stated matter-of-factly. "Within months, the last human colonies will fall." Garland tried to keep his expression neutral, but the queen caught the flash of pain in his eyes. "Does that distress you?" "They're my people," he replied simply. "Of course it distresses me. Even though they sent you to what they must have known was almost certain death." The question hung in the air between them. Garland had wondered the same thing many times during his captivity. The mission that had led to his capture had been poorly planned and inadequately supported, almost as if command had expected it to fail. "Politicians make decisions," he said carefully. "Soldiers follow orders." "Such loyalty," the queen mused. "I wonder if your people appreciate having such devoted servants." Before Garland could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the palace. The holographic displays in the war room suddenly shifted to show incoming vessels, a human strike force approaching the planet. Lord Vexer burst into the room, his usually composed demeanor cracked by urgency. "Your Majesty, the humans have launched a major assault. Long-range sensors show at least 50 vessels approaching." The queen's expression hardened. "Notify all defensive stations. Raise the planetary shields and prepare the fleet." As chaos erupted around them, Garland felt a sick certainty settle in his stomach. He recognized the tactical formation displayed on the screens. It was one he had helped develop. His own people were coming to rescue him, or perhaps simply to eliminate him as a security risk. "Your rescue arrives," the queen said, her voice devoid of emotion. "I didn't know," Garland insisted. "I swear I didn't know." She studied his face for a moment, then nodded slightly. "No, I believe you didn't, which makes what I'm about to ask even more interesting." She turned to face him fully. "Your people are about to attack my world. Will you help me defend it?" The question struck him like a physical blow. To fight against his own species would be treason of the highest order. But as he looked around the room at the Queen, who had shown him unexpected courtesy, at the guards who had come to nod respectfully when they saw him at Kova, who pressed against his side like a loyal companion, he realized that this place had become more than just a prison. "If I help you," he asked carefully, "what happens to the captured humans?" "They will be treated as prisoners of war according to the conventions we discussed." "And if I refuse?" Her smile was cold as winter starlight. "Then you will watch from the dungeons as your people die attempting to breach our defenses." Garland closed his eyes, feeling the weight of an impossible choice. When he opened them again, his mind was clear. "I'll help you." The Queen nodded, a flicker of what might have been approval crossing her features. "Very well. You will accompany me to the command center. Kova, guard him well." The command center was a hive of activity with Zitharan officers coordinating the planet's defenses. As they entered, all eyes turned toward the human walking freely among them. Some showed anger, others curiosity, but none dared question the Queen's decision. "Report," Queen Thaleen commanded. "The human fleet has divided into 3 attack groups," announced the chief tactical officer. "They're attempting to overwhelm our defenses through simultaneous strikes at multiple points." Garland studied the display, his military training automatically analyzing the attack pattern. "It's a variation of the Caldwell maneuver," he said quietly to the Queen. "They'll feint with 2 groups while the main force attempts to punch through here." He indicated a point on the hologram. The Queen considered this information, then issued new orders that repositioned key defensive platforms to counter the strategy Garland had identified. When the human attack came, it proceeded exactly as he had predicted, only to find Zitharan forces ready and waiting. The battle raged for hours with ship-to-ship combat filling the space around Zithera with fire and debris. Garland found himself completely absorbed in the tactical chess match, offering suggestions that the Queen's officers reluctantly accepted when they proved effective. But as the battle continued, it became clear that the humans had brought more forces than initially detected. Wave after wave of ships emerged from hyperspace, pressing forward despite terrible losses. "They're desperate," Garland observed, watching a group of human corvettes sacrifice themselves to create an opening for the larger vessels. "This isn't just a rescue operation, it's a full commitment." Dr. Lyrian, who had arrived to monitor the battle, pulled the Queen aside. "Your Majesty, I've completed my analysis of the human prisoner's genetic structure. You need to see this immediately." The Queen glanced at Garland, then followed the doctor to a private alcove. When she returned minutes later, her expression was unreadable, but Garland noticed a subtle change in how she looked at him. The battle's tide turned when a human battlecruiser managed to breach the outer defenses and began a direct assault on the palace itself. Energy beams lanced down from orbit, striking the palace's shields and causing the entire structure to shudder. "They're targeting the throne room," reported an officer. "They must know you're here, Your Majesty." Suddenly, alarms of a different kind began sounding internal security alerts. "Intruders in the palace," someone shouted. Multiple breach points. Through the chaos, a new figure entered the command center. Captain Sarah Morrison Garland's former second-in-command, leading a squad of human special forces. She wore full combat armor and carried an energy rifle that was already powering up. "Step away from the Queen, Garland," she shouted. "That's an order." Garland moved protectively in front of Queen Thaleen, just as Kova appeared from seemingly nowhere, positioning itself between the humans and its charges. The great beast snarled a sound like tearing metal that filled the room with menace. "Stand down, Captain Morrison," Garland said firmly. "You're making a mistake." "The mistake was ours for thinking you were salvageable," Morrison replied, her weapon trained on him. "Intel says you've gone native, maybe been brainwashed. Either way, you're coming with us." "I won't abandon my duty here." Morrison's face hardened. "Then you've made your choice, traitor." The battle that erupted in the command center was swift and brutal. Zitharan guards engaged the human infiltrators, while energy weapons discharged in lethal light shows. But in the midst of the chaos, Lord Vexer and several other Zitharan nobles made their own move. "This is our chance," Vexer shouted to his co-conspirators. "While the Queen is distracted, we can seize control." Garland, ducking plasma fire from Morrison's team, saw palace guards turning their weapons on other palace guards. The human attack had provided the perfect cover for a coup attempt that had apparently been planned for some time. "Protect the Queen!" Garland shouted to Kova, just as a blast meant for him struck the creature's flank. With a roar of pain and rage, Kova launched itself at the attackers, not the humans, but the traitorous Zitharans who had wounded it. The beast's fury was magnificent and terrible to behold as it tore through Vexer's supporters with claw and fang. Queen Thaleen, demonstrating that she was more than just a ceremonial ruler, drew a weapon of her own, a crystalline blade that hummed with energy. She moved with deadly grace, cutting down rebels even as she coordinated the defense against both the internal coup and the human infiltration. In the midst of the melee, Garland found himself face to face with Morrison again. Her armor was scorched, and there was a wildness in her eyes that spoke of too much combat stimulant and too little sleep. "They've done something to you," she said, circling him with her weapon ready. The real Garland would never side with Xenos. The real Garland learned that the universe is more complicated than our briefings suggested. He replied, staying between her and the Queen. Their confrontation was interrupted by a tremendous explosion that shook the palace to its foundations. Through the smoke and debris, something massive entered the command center, one of the palace's defensive mechs, its pilot dead at the controls, crashing through the wall in a shower of crystal and metal. Lord Vexer, bloodied but still alive, pulled himself from the wreckage. In his hand was a device that pulsed with ominous energy. "If I cannot rule Zithara," he snarled, "then no one will." Dr. Lyrian's eyes widened in horror. "That's an entropy bomb. It will destabilize matter at the molecular level. The entire palace will collapse." Without thinking, Garland lunged toward Vexer, tackling the noble, just as he activated the device. The world seemed to slow as the bomb tumbled through the air, its pulsing light growing brighter. Kova, despite its wounds, leaped forward with impossible grace, catching the device in its mouth. The creature's eyes met Garland's for one terrible moment, and he understood what it intended to do. "No!" he shouted, but it was too late. The great beast swallowed the bomb and launched itself toward the gaping hole in the wall, its powerful limbs carrying it away from the command center. It made it perhaps 50 yards before the device detonated. The explosion that followed was unlike anything Garland had ever witnessed. Where Kova had been a sphere of writhing energy, consumed everything it touched, reducing matter to its component atoms before finally collapsing in on itself. The command center fell silent except for the groans of the wounded and the distant sounds of battle elsewhere in the palace. Queen Thaleen stood frozen, staring at the space where her guardian had made its sacrifice. When she finally spoke, her voice was hollow with grief. "Kova." Garland approached her carefully, his own eyes stinging with unexpected tears. The creature had saved them all, but the loss felt like a physical wound. Morrison, her weapon lowered in shock, was the first to break the silence. I didn't know your people were capable of such loyalty." "There's a lot you don't know," Garland replied softly. The Queen turned to him then, and for the first time since he'd known her, she looked vulnerable. "Why?" she asked. "Why would it sacrifice itself for us?" Before he could answer, Dr. Lyrian approached them, tablet in hand. "Your Majesty, what I discovered about the human's genetics, now I understand why Kova responded to him." He activated the device displaying complex genetic sequences and molecular structures. Captain Garland isn't entirely human. He carries Zitharan genetic markers, specifically the bloodline markers that indicate descent from the Third Dynasty. The revelation hit like a thunderclap. The Third Dynasty had ruled Zithara over 1,000 years ago, before a great war had scattered their bloodline across the galaxy. Legend claimed that some had fled to distant worlds, but most Zitharans considered it myth. That's impossible, the Queen whispered. The DNA doesn't lie, Dr. Lyrian insisted. His maternal line carries the markers. He's part Zitharan, probably 4th or 5th generation, removed from the original bloodline. Morrison stared at Garland in shock. That's why they chose you for the reconnaissance mission. Command knew, didn't they? They sent you here knowing what would happen. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. His briefing officers had been unusually interested in his family background. His mother's unusual appearance, her stories of being adopted as a child with no memory of her early life, it all made terrible sense now. Queen Theline studied him with new eyes. A child of two worlds, she murmured. Kova sensed it immediately. That's why it responded to you. The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted their revelations. Royal Guards entered the command center surrounding the remaining human infiltrators. Captain Morrison raised her hands in surrender. Her mission clearly failed. Your Majesty, the guard captain reported, the palace is secure. All rebel forces have been neutralized or captured. And the human fleet? Withdrawing, Your Majesty. With their ground operation failed, they appear to be retreating. The Queen nodded slowly, then turned to Morrison. Captain, you will be treated according to the laws of war. Your soldiers' bodies will be returned to your people with honor. Morrison's expression softened slightly. Thank you. As for you, the Queen said, facing Garland, I believe we have much to discuss. In the days that followed, as the palace was repaired and the dead were honored, Garland found himself at the center of unprecedented changes. The revelations of his heritage had spread throughout the royal court, creating ripples of shock and speculation. He stood in the memorial garden that had been created for Kova. A beautiful space filled with crystal flowers that caught and refracted light in patterns that seemed to move with a life of their own. The Queen joined him there often, as they both mourned the creature that had saved them all. Dr. Lyrian believes he can create a genetic lock that would allow future guardian beasts to bond with those of mixed heritage, she said during one such visit. Kova's lineage will continue, and perhaps the next generation will understand what it meant that the future doesn't have to be bound by the hatreds of the past. Garland nodded, though his heart still felt heavy with loss. Kova died protecting something it believed in, protecting all of us regardless of species. Yes, the Queen agreed. And perhaps that's a lesson we all need to learn. The war between humans and Zitharans didn't end immediately, but something fundamental had shifted. Word had spread of the human who had helped defend the Zitharan capital, of the Queen who had shown mercy to captured enemies of the guardian beast who had died to save them all. Secret communications began to flow between the two powers. Informal truces allowed for prisoner exchanges and medical aid to wounded. Both sides began to realize that the conflict was costing far more than any possible victory could provide. Garland became an unofficial ambassador, using his unique position to help negotiate agreements that slowly reduced hostilities. The Queen publicly acknowledged his dual heritage and granted him a position in her court not as a prisoner, but as an advisor and mediator. Lord Vexor's rebellion had revealed the depth of Zitharan internal politics, and the Queen used the opportunity to reform many of the more oppressive aspects of her government. Dr. Lyrian, cleared of any involvement in the coup, after thorough investigation, threw himself into research that might help bridge the biological and cultural gaps between the species. Months passed. The war cooled to an uneasy ceasefire, then evolved into tentative trade agreements. Garland found himself at the heart of these negotiations, his understanding of both cultures making him uniquely valuable. Captain Morrison had been released as part of a prisoner exchange, carrying with her a message for human leadership about the possibilities for peace. Before she left, she had a private conversation with Garland. I still don't understand how you can work with them after everything, she said, though her tone held curiosity rather than accusation. Because I've seen what we could build together instead of what we can destroy apart, he replied, and because someone has to be willing to take the first step. The Queen had changed as well. The loss of Kova had affected her deeply, but it had also opened her to new perspectives. She spent more time listening to her advisors, especially those who counseled moderation, and less time in the isolation of absolute power. One evening, as they walked through the palace gardens under the light of Zithera's 3 moons, she posed a question that had clearly been weighing on her mind. If you could return to Earth to your own people, would you? Garland considered the question carefully. A year ago, I would have said yes without hesitation. But now, I think my place is here helping to build something new to Bambartsen. She nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Our worlds are different, but perhaps not incompatible. Your people's adaptability combined with our people's strength could create something neither could achieve alone. It will take generations, Garland warned. The hatred runs deep on both sides. Then we had better start now. The formal peace treaty was signed on the anniversary of Kova's death in the same memorial garden where the ceremony had created a fitting memorial to sacrifice and hope. Representatives from dozens of worlds attended, marking the end of a decade-long war that had cost millions of lives. Garland stood beside Queen Theline as she signed the document, both of them acutely aware of how different their lives might have been if a curious guard beast hadn't taken an interest in a human prisoner. In the years that followed, the Human-Zitharan Alliance became a model for interspecies cooperation throughout the galaxy. Trade flowed freely between the two peoples, and joint colonies were established where both species could live and work together. The new guardian beasts, bred with Dr. Lyrian's genetic modifications, bonded readily with beings of mixed heritage. They became symbols of the new age powerful protectors who owed their loyalty not to any single species, but to the ideals of cooperation and mutual defense. Garland eventually married not the queen, as some romantic observers had hoped, but a human diplomat named Elena, who shared his vision of interspecies cooperation. Together, they established schools that taught the histories and cultures of both peoples, helping to create a generation that saw differences as strengths rather than sources of conflict. Queen Theline never married, instead, focusing her energies on transforming the Zitharan Empire into a more inclusive confederation. She lived for many centuries, as was typical for her people, and by the end of her reign, the very concept of warfare between humans and Zitharans had become almost unthinkable. On the day she finally chose to step down, passing her crown to a council of representatives from all member species of the Confederation, she made a final pilgrimage to Kova's memorial garden. There she found an elderly Garland waiting for her, his own children and grandchildren playing among the crystal flowers. "Do you think it would be proud of what we've built?" she asked, gesturing to where a group of human and Zitharan children were playing together under the watchful eye of a young guardian beast, Kova's great-great-grandchild. Garland smiled, his eyes bright despite his age. "I think it knew what we could become. That's why it chose to save us all." They stood together in comfortable silence. Two old friends who had traveled an impossible journey from captor and prisoner to allies, and eventually to family. The crystal flowers chimed softly in the breeze, carrying with them the sound of children's laughter and the distant calls of guardian beasts playing in their enclosures. Above them, transport ships from a dozen different species crisscrossed the sky, their passengers traveling freely between worlds that had once been bitter enemies. It was a future neither had imagined possible when they first met in that judgment chamber so many years ago. But it was a future made possible by the sacrifice of a noble beast who had seen beyond species and loyalty to something greater, the potential for understanding, growth, and love between all sentient beings. The memorial garden remained a site of pilgrimage for centuries, visited by beings from across the galaxy who came to remember the guardian beast who had died not for war or conquest, but for the possibility of peace. Each visitor left a small crystal flower until the garden bloomed with countless colors and the gentle music of hope. And in the stories told to children of every species, Kova lived on not as a beast of war, but as the guardian of something far more precious, the dream of a universe where different peoples could live together in harmony, protected not by the fear of their differences, but by the strength they found in unity. The alien queen's guardian beast had indeed responded to only one voice, But in the end, that voice had spoken for all. Dr. Lyrian's research notes preserved in the Royal Archive would later reveal his belief that Kova's actions were not anomalous but inevitable. Guardian beasts, he theorized, were bred not simply to protect, but to preserve the future. In recognizing Garland's dual heritage, Kova had seen the future itself, a future where the boundaries between species would blur and the galaxy would be stronger for it. As the decades rolled into centuries, this theory would prove prophetic. The human-Zitharan alliance would expand to encompass dozens of species, creating a galactic community based on mutual respect and shared purpose. And at the heart of it all, remembered in song and story, was the tale of a guard beast who had chosen to die so that others might learn to live together. In the end, Queen Thaleen had been right. It was fascinating. But more than that, it was hopeful. And hope, as any guardian knows, is the most precious thing worth protecting.